Hey guys, tonight we journey back, way back, past the edge of recorded history into the silent landscapes of forgotten worlds. We're going to walk the ghostly streets of cities so old their names have been lost to the wind, and stand in the shadows of monuments built by people who left behind only mysteries. You'll find yourself in a world lit only by fire and stars, a world of harsh beauty and sudden endings. And let's be honest, if you were dropped into any of these ancient settings for real, you probably wouldn't survive the first day without a decent Wi-Fi signal and a good pair of shoes. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. It's always a quiet thrill to see where you're all listening from, so feel free to post your location and what time it is in your corner of the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Your eyes slowly adjust to the darkness. There is no moonlight, only a brilliant, terrifyingly dense blanket of stars overhead, untouched by the glow of any city. The air is cool and thin, carrying the scent of dry earth, wild herbs, and the faint, musky smell of distant animals. You're in southeastern Anatolia, the land that will one day become modern Turkey, but the year is somewhere around 9600 BCE. The last great ice age is breathing its final chilly gasps. The concepts of farming, pottery, writing, and the wheel are all thousands of years in the future. You are a hunter-gatherer, your world defined by the seasonal migration of game and the location of the nearest freshwater spring. Life is immediate, demanding, and usually short. No one's offering you a protein bar. Your best bet is a handful of wild pistachios and the hope of not getting eaten by a leopard. You've been tracking a herd of gazelle for days with your small king group, and you find yourselves drawn to a prominent rounded hill on the horizon. A potbelly hill, as the local tongue might call it. As you crest the ridge, you stop. The familiar landscape of rolling hills and sparse woodland gives way to something impossible. Below you, hundreds of people are gathered. They are quarrying, hauling, and erecting colossal pillars of limestone, each shaped like a capital T. It's an anthill of activity, a coordinated effort on a scale you've never seen. This is Göbekli Tepe. You watch as a team of 50 people, grunting and sweating, levers a massive stone from the bedrock using nothing but flint tools, wooden poles, and brute force. Another group drags a finished pillar, weighing at least 10 tons, on a crude log sled toward a massive circular pit. This isn't a weekend DIY project with a few buddies. This is an all-hands-on-deck, multi-generational undertaking, likely fueled by nothing more than peer pressure and the promise of a feast. The air buzzes with the rhythmic clink of stone tools, and the low chants of the movers, and rising above it all is the smell of roasting meat. This much work requires a lot of calories. You creep closer, drawn by a flickering torchlight. The pillars are not blank. Their surfaces are covered in exquisitely carved reliefs of the animals that dominate your world and your nightmares. There are long, slithering snakes, snarling foxes, powerful boars, and scorpions with their tails arched to strike. But most prominent are the vultures, their wings outstretched. Historians still argue whether this site was a temple to forgotten gods, a sophisticated astronomical observatory, or simply a neutral ground for scattered clans to meet, trade, and feast. What is certain, however, is that it is the oldest temple complex ever discovered, predating Stonehenge by an astonishing 6,000 years. There are human figures here too, but they are stylized and strange. One carving appears to depict a headless man, while other carvings show vultures seemingly tending to headless bodies. It's led to a fringe but fascinating theory that these people practiced a form of sky burial, leaving their dead on the hilltop for the vultures to consume, believing the birds would carry the soul to the heavens. It's a stark reminder that this temple wasn't just for celebrating life, but for processing death. As you stand there, a stranger in a time before time, you wonder about the purpose of it all. Were they trying to appease angry spirits, impress their neighbors? Or maybe this was just the world's most overly ambitious community center, and they really, really wanted a good place to hold their annual potluck. Whatever the reason, you feel a sense of profound awe. These people, who own nothing but the tools they could carry, came together and reshaped the world with their bare hands, driven by a belief so powerful it could literally move mountains. The flickering torches and carved vultures of Göbekli Tepe fade into a deep, dreamless sleep that lasts for 2,000 years. When you open your eyes again, the world feels softer. The chilly wind of the early Holocene has warmed, and the sparse woodlands have thickened. The great innovation hinted at by the grain gathering at that ancient temple has now fully blossomed. You're still in Anatolia, but you've jumped forward to around 7,500 BCE. The agricultural revolution has happened. People have figured out how to domesticate plants and animals, and that one simple, world-shattering change has made the nomadic life of your ancestors obsolete. Why chase the gazelle when you can keep a goat in your backyard? You find yourself on the edge of a vast reed marsh, a paradise of waterfowl and clay. Ahead of you is not a temporary camp or a ritual hill, but a permanent town. A sprawling mound of tightly packed houses that seems to rise organically from the plain. This is Çatalhöyük. At its peak, it will be home to as many as 8,000 people, making it one of the largest and most sophisticated settlements on the entire planet. But as you get closer, you notice something profoundly strange. There are no streets. No alleys, no courtyards, no grand boulevards. The entire town is a single, continuous block of buildings, a honeycomb of mud brick and timber fused into one massive structure. It looks less like a city and more like a single colossal apartment building designed by someone who really, really hated doorways. The life of the city, you quickly realize, isn't on the ground, it's on the roofs. You scramble up a discarded ladder leaning against an outer wall, and suddenly you're in the bustling heart of Çatalhöyük. The rooftops form a sprawling, open-air plaza. People are walking from home to home, their footsteps soft on the sun-baked plaster. Children chase each other, darting around open chimneys that puff lazy columns of smoke into the air. Women grind wheat on saddle querns, their rhythmic work a constant soothing background noise. Men nap obsidian, the sharp crack of the volcanic glass echoing across the rooftopscape. This is the public square, the highway system, and the neighborhood barbecue spot all rolled into one. It's efficient, but you can't help but think that a single misplaced step after a long day could send you tumbling right into your neighbor's living room. You see a family gathering around a dark, rectangular hole in their roof. A man lowers a sturdy wooden ladder into the opening and disappears. One by one, the others follow. This is the front door. Curious, you find an unoccupied home and make your way down a similar ladder. You descend from the bright, open-air world into the cool, dim interior of a Neolithic house. The air is thick with the smell of wood smoke and packed earth. The main room is spacious, with raised platforms along the walls for sitting and sleeping. The walls themselves are coated in a smooth white plaster, which serves as a canvas. On one wall is a stunning mural depicting a hunt, with tiny human figures bravely surrounding a massive wild bull, or aurochs. The bull is a recurring theme here. Mounted skulls and horns, known as bucrania, are plastered into the walls of many homes, their vacant eyes staring into the room. As your eyes adjust further, you notice the floor isn't entirely flat. You run your hand over a slightly raised section of the plaster. It's here that the people of Çatalhöyük keep their most precious possessions, their ancestors. They buried their dead directly beneath the sleeping platforms. Historians still argue whether this was a form of ancestor worship, a way of keeping the family line physically present, or simply a practical matter in a city with no public cemetery. Whatever the reason, the idea of sleeping just a few inches above Great Aunt Marge is a little unsettling. It certainly gives a whole new meaning to having skeletons in the closet, or in this case, under the floorboards. You also find small, stylized human figures carved from stone or molded from clay. Many are female, with exaggerated features, and were once famously interpreted as evidence of a widespread mother goddess cult. More recent scholarship, however, suggests they might represent respected female elders, or are perhaps just symbolic charms for fertility and protection. In a world without written language, every object has to tell its own story, and we are left trying to decipher the grammar. You sit on one of the platforms, in the quiet dark, listening to the muffled footsteps from the roof above. This is a city, but it's an intimate, communal one, built on family, history, and a shared understanding of the world. It is a bold experiment in living together, a stepping stone between the wandering hunters of Göbekli Tepe and the sprawling empires yet to come. The gentle, smoky confines of the Neolithic house in Catalhoyuk dissolve, and you are adrift once more, floating forward through 4.5 millennia. The world you awaken in is hotter, drier, and far more complex. You're standing on a dusty plain under a relentless sun, the kind that bakes the very air you breathe. In the distance, the wide, silty waters of the Indus River glide lazily toward the Arabian Sea. This is the heart of what is now Pakistan, and the year is roughly 2500 BCE. The Great Pyramids of Giza are newly built wonders far to the west, but here, an equally impressive, if more subtle, civilization is at its absolute peak. You are about to enter Mohenjo-Daro, the Mound of the Dead. Unlike the organic jumble of Catalhoyuk, this city announces its intention from a mile away: order. You walk toward a high man-made citadel, and below it, a lower town unfolds in a stunningly precise grid. The streets are straight and wide, crossing each other at perfect right angles. It feels planned, engineered, and deeply logical. There's a main street nearly 40 feet wide, a veritable superhighway of the Bronze Age. The buildings that line these avenues are not made of sun-dried mud, but of millions upon millions of fire-baked bricks. And here is a quirky little detail that speaks volumes. The bricks are standardized. They are all the same size and ratio, produced on an industrial scale. This isn't a community project. This is municipal infrastructure. You turn down a narrower residential street. Here, the houses present blank, windowless walls, creating a sense of privacy and keeping the interiors cool. You slip through an open doorway into a home. It's built around a central courtyard, which provides light and air. Many of the homes are 2 stories high, and almost all of them have a dedicated bathing area and a toilet connected to a citywide sanitation system. You see covered drainage channels running down the center of the streets, carrying waste away from the homes. The sophistication is staggering. They had urban plumbing and waste management 4,500 years ago, a luxury that would disappear for thousands of years and arguably be better than what you'd find in a medieval European castle. You make your way up to the citadel, the civic and ceremonial heart of the city. Here you find what is perhaps Mohenjo-Daro's most famous feature, the Great Bath. It's a huge, sunken brick pool, more than 12 meters long, and sealed with natural tar to make it waterproof. Steps lead down into the water from either end. It's surrounded by a series of small rooms. Was it a public bathhouse, a place for ritual purification, or the private swimming pool of the city's ruler? Like so much here, its exact purpose is a mystery. But what's missing is just as important as what's present. There are no grand palaces, no colossal temples to the gods, no magnificent royal tombs filled with gold. The society that built this marvel of engineering seems to have been remarkably egalitarian, or at least they weren't into flaunting their wealth and power the way the Egyptians or Mesopotamians were. You see small artifacts the people left behind, intricate stone weights for trade, beautiful pottery, and countless small square seals made of soapstone. These seals are masterpieces in miniature, carved with breathtakingly realistic animals, humped bulls, elephants, rhinoceroses, and a strange unicorn-like creature. Above the animals are lines of elegant, indecipherable script. This was their writing system, and it is one of history's great unsolved puzzles. We have thousands of examples, but no one can read them. Imagine finding a library where all the books are locked. We see their art, we walk their streets, but we cannot hear their voices. Archaeologists continue to debate whether the script even represents a full language or is just a system of symbols for trade. You find one of their most famous creations, a small stone bust of a stern-looking man with a trimmed beard, a patterned robe slung over one shoulder, and a calm, meditative expression. He is known as the Priest King, but that's just a romantic guess. He could have been a mayor, a respected elder, or even just the ancient equivalent of the guy who wins the Most Interesting Man in the World award. Without readable text, we simply don't know. As the sun begins to set, casting long shadows down the perfectly straight streets, an eerie silence descends. There is no evidence of a great battle, no citywide fire, no layer of conquest. Sometime around 1900 BCE, the people of the Indus Valley just left. The rivers may have shifted course, the climate may have become too arid, but the result is the same. They walked away from one of the most advanced cities on Earth, leaving the drains to clog and the dust to gather, bequeathing us a ghost city of magnificent order and profound silence. The silence of Mohenjo-Daro's perfectly ordered streets fades away, replaced by the gentle, rhythmic shushing of waves against a pebble shore. You taste salt in the air, a clean, sharp scent mixed with the fragrance of wild thyme and sun-warmed olive groves. The relentless brown dust of the Indus Valley has been washed away by the brilliant, impossible blue of the Aegean Sea. You've traveled west and forward in time to the island of Crete, somewhere around 1700 BCE. This is the home of the Minoan civilization, a vibrant seafaring culture that has become the dominant power in the region. You are approaching a vast, sprawling complex of buildings on a low hill. It's not a fortress, bristling with defenses, but an open, welcoming, and utterly confusing collection of rooms, courtyards, and corridors. This is the Palace of Knossos. The first thing you notice is the color. Unlike the muted earth tones of the cities you've seen before, Knossos is alive with pigment. Great wooden columns, painted a deep, rich red, taper strangely downwards, wider at the top than the bottom. The walls are covered in brilliant frescoes, paintings of a world teeming with life and motion. You see leaping dolphins, graceful octopuses, and griffins with the bodies of lions and the heads of eagles. There are also people depicted with a fluid, natural grace. The men are athletic, with brown skin and impossibly narrow waists. The women are elegant and fashionable, with elaborate curled hairstyles and layered, flounced skirts that seem centuries ahead of their time. They're gossiping, watching ceremonies, and engaging with the world. You wander deeper into the palace, which feels less like a single building and more like a small city. The layout is a bewildering maze of rooms, storerooms, workshops, and grand staircases, all connected by twisting corridors and built around a huge central courtyard. It's easy to see how the later Greek myth of the labyrinth, home to the monstrous Minotaur, was born from the memory of this place. Honestly, it would be a terrible place to try and find the bathroom in a hurry. You pass giant clay jars, called pithoi, some taller than you, that were used to store olive oil, wine, and grain, the source of the palace's wealth. This wasn't just a king's home, it was the administrative and economic hub of the entire island. In a smaller chamber, you find the famous throne room. An elegant, high-backed throne made of gypsum sits against the wall, flanked by frescoes of those majestic griffins. It's one of the oldest thrones in Europe, and it feels surprisingly intimate, not built to intimidate, but to preside. As you explore, you find evidence of a civilization obsessed with comfort and sanitation. You see terracotta pipes running beneath the floors, part of a complex system for managing water. Some archaeologists believe the Minoans had the world's first flush toilets, a marvel of plumbing that wouldn't be matched for over 3,000 years. But it's the art that keeps drawing you in, especially the depictions of their most thrilling and dangerous ritual, bull leaping. You stand before a famous fresco showing a huge charging bull. In front of it, a figure grasps the horns, preparing to vault. Another figure is in midair, somersaulting over the bull's back, while a third stands behind with arms outstretched, ready to catch the acrobat. It's a stunning display of courage and athleticism. Historians still argue whether this was a religious ceremony, a rite of passage, or simply the world's first extreme sport. Whatever it was, it shows a fearless, dynamic relationship with the natural world, a far cry from the submissive worship you might expect. The overall feeling here is one of peace and prosperity. This was a culture that relied on trade, not conquest. Their power came from their ships, which controlled the Aegean sea lanes, not from large armies. That lack of fortification suddenly makes sense. They didn't fear invasion because, for a long time, no one could touch them at sea. But as you stand in the sun-drenched central court, you feel a faint, almost imperceptible tremor beneath your feet, a whisper of something to come. Sometime around 1450 BCE, this vibrant civilization will come to a sudden, fiery end. All the great palaces on Crete will be destroyed by intense fires. Was it the cataclysmic volcanic eruption on the nearby island of Thera, which triggered tsunamis and choked the sky with ash? Or was it an invasion by the more warlike Mycenaeans from the Greek mainland, who saw their chance to take over? For now, though, the air is clear, the laughter echoes across the courtyard, and the bulls are still leaping. The bright, hopeful world of Minoan Crete dissolves in fire and smoke. The scent of olive groves and sea salt is replaced by the acrid smell of ash and ruin. When the haze clears, you find yourself in a different land, a harsher, more severe landscape. You have moved north across the sea to the rugged, mountainous mainland of Greece. The year is now somewhere around 1300 BCE. The power vacuum left by the collapse of Minoan sea power has been filled decisively by a new culture, the Mycenaeans. These are the people who will be immortalized in Homer's epic poems, the heroes of the Trojan War. You are standing at the foot of a steep, rocky hill, approaching a citadel that looks less like a home for artists and more like a fortress designed by pessimists. This is Mycenae, the legendary home of King Agamemnon. The first and most obvious difference from Minoan Knossos is the walls. They are immense, built from colossal, roughly hewn boulders, so large that later Greeks, believing no mortals could have moved them, would say they were built by the mythical one-eyed giants, the Cyclopes. This is Cyclopean masonry, and it screams one thing: fear. Unlike the Minoans on their island paradise, these people lived in a constant state of readiness, their world a chessboard of rival warlords and potential threats. You approach the main entrance. The famous Lion Gate, two massive stone posts support a huge lintel, and above it, in a triangular slab, two lionesses stand on either side of a central column, their lost heads once turned to face any who dared approach. It's a raw, powerful statement of authority, the Bronze Age equivalent of a nightclub with a very grim-looking bouncer. You pass through the gate and begin to climb a steep ramp into the city proper. Inside, the citadel is cramped and serious. The buildings are solid and functional, clustered together for defense. There are no grand open courtyards for bull leaping here. At the very peak of the citadel is the king's palace, and at its heart is the Megaron. You step into this great hall, and the difference from a Minoan throne room is palpable. The air is thick with smoke from a large circular hearth in the center of the room, which a hole in the ceiling struggles to vent. 4 great pillars surround the hearth, supporting the roof. Against the far wall is a throne, a place for a chieftain, a wainax, to hold court. The walls would have been decorated with frescoes, but the subjects are different. Instead of playful dolphins, you see scenes of warfare, warriors and chariots, sieges of cities, and hunts for lions and boars. Remember those elegant, bare-chested Minoan women and their flounced skirts? The Mycenaean versions are more stoic, more formally depicted, wrapped in heavy robes. You wander into the attached workshops and storerooms and find clay tablets, baked hard by the fires that eventually destroyed the palace. They are inscribed with a script known as Linear B. For decades, it was as unreadable as the Indus script, until the brilliant amateur linguist Michael Ventris cracked the code in the 1950s, revealing it as a very early form of Greek. But the tablets contain no poetry, no history, no letters from the king. They are all inventories. Lists of chariot wheels, wool, bronze ingots, and personnel. It's the bureaucratic paperwork of a highly organized, centralized, and militaristic society. It's all very practical, the ancient equivalent of a warehouse full of spreadsheets. Scholars debate the exact nature of the Mycenaean takeover of Crete. Did they invade and conquer, or simply move into the chaotic aftermath of the Thera eruption? Whatever the case, they learned much from the Minoans, adopting their art styles, their fashion to some degree, and their writing system, adapting it for their own language. In a series of deep shaft graves discovered by the archaeologist Heinrich Schliemann, you see the wealth of these warrior princes. You find golden death masks, bronze daggers inlaid with incredible scenes of lion hunts, and swords with golden pommels. One of the masks is so impressive that Schliemann famously declared, "I have gazed upon the face of Agamemnon." A quirky and inconvenient truth, however, is that modern dating techniques have shown the mask is actually about 300 years too old to have belonged to the legendary king of the Trojan War. But for these kings, death was just another chance to display their power and status. As you stand in the smoky Megaron, you feel a growing sense of unease. The walls are thick, the art is full of violence, and the accountants are counting spears. This is a civilization braced for a fight. And as it happens, a fight is coming that they, and almost everyone else in this part of the world, are going to lose. The smoky, fortified Megaron of Mycenae fades, but the feeling of a world braced for a fight lingers in the air. You pull back, your perspective rising high above the Greek mainland, until you can see the entire eastern Mediterranean laid out below you like a brilliant sun-drenched map. It's the late 13th century BCE, a golden age of interconnected empires. A vast, intricate web of diplomacy and trade connects the great powers. Mighty Hittite warriors and their chariots control the highlands of Anatolia. The new kingdom of Egypt, ruled by powerful pharaohs, is a breadbasket of unimaginable wealth. The city-states of the Levant, like Ugarit on the Syrian coast, are bustling ports where goods and ideas from a dozen cultures mingle. And the Mycenaean warlords, with all their bureaucratic bean counting, control the sea lanes of the Aegean. It's a globalized world, Bronze Age style. A ship leaving Egypt might carry a cargo of grain and gold, destined for a Hittite port where it will be exchanged for silver and iron. Another vessel might sail from Cyprus, its hold laden with heavy copper ingots, stopping in Crete to trade for fine pottery and olive oil before heading on to mainland Greece. Kings write to each other on clay tablets, calling each other brother, arranging diplomatic marriages, and complaining about the quality of the last shipment of gifts they received. It's a complex, sophisticated system, a delicate clockwork of moving parts, all powered by surplus grain, a steady climate, and the shared desire for profit. It feels stable. It feels permanent. But now you feel a subtle shift in the rhythm of this world. There are whispers from the villages, complaints of harvests that are just a little bit smaller than the year before. The rains, once predictable, have become erratic. A prolonged period of drought is setting in, stressing the delicate balance of the palace economies. These huge centralized kingdoms are like massive, top-heavy beasts. They require enormous amounts of food to keep the scribes, the soldiers, and the artisans fed. When the food supply falters, the beast begins to starve, and its own weight becomes its greatest enemy. You see tremors of internal unrest, peasant uprisings, and civil wars breaking out within the great empires. The clockwork is starting to shudder, and then they appear. At first, they are just a rumor, a frightening story told by a panicked ship's captain who barely made it back to port. Fleets of strange ships filled with warriors from unknown lands. They are not an army from a rival kingdom. They don't follow the established rules of warfare. They are not trying to conquer territory or install a new king. They are simply a destructive wave, a confederation of displaced, desperate, and violent peoples. The Egyptians will give them a name, the Sea Peoples. You watch as this storm makes landfall. The mighty Hittite Empire, a superpower that once fought the Egyptians to a standstill, simply evaporates. Its great capital, Hattusa, is violently torched and utterly destroyed, never to be inhabited again. One of the great mysteries of the ancient world is how such a formidable military power could be so completely annihilated. Down on the Syrian coast, the rich trading hub of Ugarit is next. A scribe in the city bakes a final, desperate clay tablet, a letter pleading for help from a neighboring king. My father, behold, the enemy's ships came here. My cities were burned, and they did evil things in my country. The letter was found still in the kill, a message in a bottle that was never sent. The city was burned to the ground. The wave rolls on toward Mycenaean Greece. Those massive Cyclopean walls, built to withstand any siege, prove useless. The fortified citadels of Mycenae, Pylos, and Tyrans are all put to the torch and abandoned. All those careful inventories of chariot wheels and javelins were for nothing. The complex society that produced them vanishes. The art of writing in the form of linear B is forgotten, plunging Greece into a centuries-long dark age. Historians still argue fiercely about the primary cause of the collapse. Were the Sea Peoples a tidal wave that smashed a stable world, or were they merely the scavengers that moved in after a perfect storm of climate change, earthquakes, and internal rebellion had already brought these empires to their knees? Only Egypt, bold and resilient, manages to hold the line. The pharaoh Ramesses III meets the Sea Peoples in a chaotic, desperate battle on the shores of the Nile Delta. On the walls of his mortuary temple at Medinet Habu, he carves a dramatic, self-aggrandizing account of his victory. The carvings show Egyptian soldiers routing a motley coalition of invaders in horned helmets and distinctive feathered headdresses. Among them are people called the Peliset, who many scholars believe would go on to settle on the nearby coast and become the biblical Philistines. Egypt survives, but it is a Pyrrhic victory. It is bankrupted, exhausted, and its great days of empire are over. You are left standing in the smoldering ruins of a world. The international trade routes are shattered. The palaces are rubble. The light of civilization has been extinguished across the eastern Mediterranean, a sudden, catastrophic systems failure that stands as one of history's most dramatic turning points. The ashes of the Bronze Age world grow cold. The great empires are gone, their trade routes are dead, and the light of literacy has been extinguished in many lands. A profound silence descends, a quiet that will last for centuries. You let yourself drift in this darkness, a long, untethered sleep that carries you across a vast ocean and forward a few hundred years. When you reawaken, the world is not reborn in fire, but in water. The air is so thick with humidity you can practically drink it. The heat is a physical presence, a heavy, wet blanket that clings to your skin. The world is a riot of green, an endless, suffocating jungle that presses in from all sides. The sounds are a symphony of the unseen, the guttural roar of a howler monkey, the frantic buzzing of insects the size of your thumb, and the constant, dripping powder of moisture falling from the canopy. You are in the lowlands of the Mexican Gulf Coast, a region that will one day be Veracruz and Tabasco. The year is around 1200 BCE. Remember all that bronze the Mycenaeans were so proud of, the metal that defined an entire age. These people don't have it, nor do they have iron. They have stone, wood, bone, and an astonishing degree of artistry and will. You are trudging through a swampy trail, the mud sucking at your feet with every step. There is no easy way to Uber out of here. This is the heartland of the Olmec, a civilization so foundational that many historians call them the cultura madre, the mother culture of Mesoamerica. You push aside a giant dripping palm frond and you see it. It stops you dead in your tracks. Rising from the jungle floor, half swallowed by vines and moss, is a face. It is a colossal stone head carved from a single, massive boulder of volcanic basalt. It's at least 8 feet tall and weighs more tons than you can count. The face is broad, with a flattened nose and full, fleshy lips that are pulled down slightly at the corners, giving it a stern, almost pouting expression. This is not a generic face. It's a portrait. It has a personality. On its head is what looks like a protective helmet, perhaps of the kind worn by players in a ritual ball game. You reach out and touch the rough, weathered stone. It feels ancient, powerful, and utterly indifferent to your presence. This is just one of 17 such heads that have been discovered, scattered across the Olmec heartland. Each one is unique, depicting a different individual. Archaeologists still debate whether these heads depict specific rulers, powerful ancestors, or perhaps even ritualistically sacrificed ball players. What isn't up for debate is the incredible effort involved. The basalt stone was quarried in the Tuxtla Mountains, more than 80 miles away. The Olmec, with no beasts of burden and no knowledge of the wheel, somehow transported these multi-ton boulders through treacherous swamps and dense jungle to their ceremonial centers like San Lorenzo and La Venta. It's a feat of logistics and raw manpower that is difficult to comprehend, and certainly not your average garden gnome project. The enigmatic features of the heads have led to some truly fringe theories, most notably the idea that they depict visitors from Africa. While this idea has been thoroughly debunked by mainstream archaeology, the features are consistent with the physiognomy of the local inhabitants. It speaks to the power of these sculptures to ignite the imagination. They are so unexpected, so masterfully rendered, that they seem to demand an extraordinary explanation. You look into the stone eyes and see the confident stare of a civilization at the height of its power. The Olmec were the originators of so much that would come to define Mesoamerica. They built the first great ceremonial pyramids, aligned with the stars. They practiced a ritual ball game that was a deadly serious affair, part sport, part religious ceremony. They may have developed the first writing system in the Americas, and their understanding of calendars and astronomy laid the groundwork for the more famous Maya. They worshipped a pantheon of strange gods, including a were jaguar, a hybrid of human and jungle cat that represented the raw power of the natural world. But like all the civilizations on our journey, their time came to an end. Around 400 BCE, their great centers were abandoned, and their culture faded back into the jungle. It wasn't a sudden collapse, more like a slow, quiet decline. As you stand before this silent, giant sentinel, you can feel the jungle already trying to reclaim it, a reminder that, in this part of the world, nature always gets the final say. The humid, green world of the Olmec fades back into the jungle. And for more than 1,000 years, their legacy quietly ferments in the rich soil of Mesoamerica. When you open your eyes, you're in the same jungle, but the scale of everything has changed. The ceremonial mounds of the mother culture have been replaced by mountains of quarried stone that clawed the sky. You are standing in the grand plaza of a vast, silent city, sometime around 950 CE. A troop of spider monkeys howls in the canopy high above, their calls echoing off the limestone facades. Parrots flash like scattered jewels against the deep green. The air is thick, warm, and smells of damp earth, decaying leaves, and the sweet, cloying scent of wild blossoms. Before you, a monumental staircase, so steep it's more like a ladder, rises up the face of a colossal step pyramid. This is one of the great cities of the classic Maya, Tikal, Palenque, or Copan. In their prime, these were bustling, vibrant metropolises, home to tens of thousands of people. Their stone plazas, now covered in a carpet of moss and weeds, would have been paved with brilliant white plaster, reflecting the tropical sun with blinding intensity. The pyramids themselves wouldn't have been the drab gray stone you see now. They would have been coated in stucco and painted in dazzling shades of red, blue, and yellow, vibrant beacons of royal power. The silence you hear would have been a cacophony of vendors hawking wares, priests chanting from the temple tops, and the ever-present, rhythmic pat-pat-pat of women grinding maize for tortillas. You run your hand over a tall flat stone monument at the base of the pyramid. It's a stela, and its entire surface is covered in some of the most complex and beautiful carvings you have ever seen. There are portraits of fierce-looking kings in impossibly elaborate feathered headdresses, holding symbols of their power. Surrounding them are columns of intricate little pictures or glyphs. This is the Maya writing system, a sophisticated script that could represent both whole words and phonetic syllables. For centuries, scholars thought they were merely mystical symbols, but we now know they tell detailed histories of the cities, who the king was, when he was born, when he ascended to the throne, who he conquered in battle, and when he died. It's an incredibly detailed and often rather boastful historical record. Alongside the writing are dates from their long count calendar, a system so precise it could pinpoint a specific day within a cycle thousands of years long. It makes trying to figure out your modern recycling schedule seem like child's play. But now, the stories have stopped. The last date carved on a stela in many of these southern lowland cities is sometime in the 9th century, and then nothing. The king stopped commissioning monuments, the scribes put down their brushes, and the people, over the course of a few generations, simply walked away. They abandoned these magnificent cities, letting the jungle surge back in to swallow the plazas and pry the stones of the temples apart. This is the great classic Maya collapse, and its exact cause remains one of archaeology's most hotly debated topics. You climb the first few steps of the pyramid and look out over the city. What could have happened here? For a long time, the Maya were imagined as a peaceful, stargazing people, but the decipherment of their writing has revealed a much darker and more brutal reality. The city-states were locked in a near-constant state of intense warfare, with alliances shifting like sand. The carvings are full of scenes of kings humiliating and sacrificing their captured rivals. Maybe they simply exhausted themselves, fighting each other into oblivion in a kind of Bronze Age telenovela of endless backstabbing and revenge. Or perhaps the enemy was the sky itself. To support these huge populations, they cleared vast tracts of jungle for agriculture. This widespread deforestation may have altered local rainfall patterns, and ice cores and lake sediments from the region point to a series of prolonged, devastating droughts that struck right around the time of the collapse. The divine kings, whose primary role was to perform the rituals that guaranteed the rains and good harvests, were suddenly failing. You can imagine the growing desperation as the wells ran dry and the maze withered. In some royal tombs, archaeologists have found evidence of bizarre last-ditch rituals, suggesting the elites were doing anything they could to appease the angry gods. One of the most personal of these rituals was bloodletting, where kings and queens would use sharpened stingray spines to pierce their own tongues or other body parts, offering their own sacred blood in the hopes of maintaining cosmic order. It's a stark reminder that for all their power, they were ultimately at the mercy of the weather. The truth is likely a grim cocktail of all these factors: endemic warfare, a fragile environment pushed past its breaking point, and a loss of faith in the ruling class, all culminating in the abandonment of a civilization at its absolute peak. You are left alone in a ghost city, a magnificent stone skeleton that asks a question we still can't fully answer. The suffocating green of the Maya jungle recedes, and the air thins and cools. You've traveled north into the highlands, to a broad, semi-arid valley cradled by mountains. The year is earlier now, around 400 CE. You are in the central basin of Mexico, and the civilization that will one day inspire the Maya is at its zenith. Before you lies a city that is not wrestling with the jungle, but commanding the landscape. It is a metropolis of staggering scale and relentless geometric precision. The structures are so massive, so inhuman in their scope, that when the Aztecs stumbled upon its vine-choked ruins nearly 1,000 years later, they believed it could only have been built by giants, and they named it Teotihuacan, the birthplace of the gods. You are standing at the southern end of a vast, ceremonial causeway that bisects the city. The Aztecs called it the Micoatli, the Avenue of the Dead, believing the great platform mounds that line its sides were royal tombs. They were wrong. They were actually the basis for temples, but the name has a chillingly appropriate feel. The avenue is nearly 2.5 miles long and 130 feet wide, a grand processional way that stretches toward a mountain on the northern horizon. It is so perfectly straight and wide you could land a small plane on it, though that would probably be frowned upon by the ancient authorities. As you begin to walk, you feel utterly dwarfed, a tiny human figure in a landscape designed for deities. To your right, a colossal structure dominates the skyline. It is the Pyramid of the Sun. It's not as steep as the Maya pyramids, but its base is immense, nearly the same size as the Great Pyramid of Giza in Egypt. It rises in 5 great tiers, a man-made mountain of earth and stone. It is a brute, a statement of overwhelming power. Deep beneath its center, archaeologists discovered a natural cave shaped like a 4-leaf clover that was enlarged and used for rituals long before the pyramid was ever built. The entire monumental structure is positioned to sanctify this one sacred spot, a place believed to be a point of creation, an ancient womb of the earth. You continue your walk, the sheer, plaster-coated walls of the temple platforms rising on either side. You pass the citadel, a vast sunken square that contains the smaller but exquisitely decorated temple of the feathered serpent, a deity the Maya would call Kukulkan and the Aztecs Quetzalcoatl. But your eyes are drawn to the end of the avenue where the Pyramid of the Moon stands, perfectly framed by the brooding peak of the mountain behind it, the Cerro Gordo. It is smaller than the Sun Pyramid, but its placement gives it a sense of ceremonial finality, the grand climax of the entire city's layout. And it holds a darker secret. Excavations have revealed a series of dedicatory burials deep within it, each one a gruesome tableau. You find sacrificed soldiers, their hands tied behind their backs, some decapitated. You find the remains of pumas, jaguars, and eagles, the sacred predators of the Mesoamerican world, buried alive in cages. It's a terrifying glimpse into the brutal ideology that underpinned this city's serene, geometric order. But where did the people live? You wander off the main avenue into the surrounding grid. The city isn't a collection of huts around a ceremonial core. It's made up of hundreds of large, single-story apartment compounds. These are huge, windowless stone structures, each housing multiple families who shared courtyards and shrines. From the outside, they look like fortresses. Inside, however, the walls were often covered in stunning, brightly colored murals depicting priests, gods, and sacred animals. It's a unique form of urban living, a planned city of high-density housing that suggests a powerful, centralized authority. And that is the greatest mystery of all. Who is in charge? Historians still argue whether Teotihuacan was ruled by a single dynastic king, a council of elite families, or a powerful priesthood. We simply don't know. Unlike the Maya, who plastered their kings' faces and deeds on every available surface, the art of Teotihuacan is anonymous and impersonal. There are no portraits of rulers, no royal tombs, no inscriptions boasting of one man's conquests. We don't even know what language the builders spoke or what they called their own magnificent city. The name Teotihuacan is a gift from a later culture, a label stuck on a magnificent, unclaimed masterpiece. Around 550 CE, this great city also met a violent end. The temples and palaces along the Avenue of the Dead were systematically looted and burned. The destruction was not random. It was targeted at the seats of power, suggesting a furious internal uprising, the common people finally turning on their silent, anonymous masters. You are left standing in the ashes of the greatest and most enigmatic city of the ancient Americas, a metropolis without a king and without a name. The smoke from the burned temples of Teotihuacan thins and drifts away, and the world dissolves into a featureless gray. You are no longer walking, but floating. The air grows incredibly dry, and the ground below you transforms into a vast, sun-scorched palette of brown, red, and ochre. You are hundreds of miles south, suspended high above the coastal plains of Peru. Sometime around 500 CE, this is the Nazca Desert, one of the most arid places on the entire planet. From your great height, it looks like a colossal, empty canvas, a desolate landscape of rock and sand that stretches from the Andes Mountains to the Pacific Ocean. It seems utterly empty, a place where life has given up. But as your perspective slowly lowers, you begin to notice something impossible. Scratched onto the surface of this desert floor are lines. At first, they are just simple straight lines, ruled with an unnatural precision, running for miles over hills and through ravines, completely ignoring the topography. They look like someone took a giant ruler to the face of the earth. Then you see more complex shapes, huge trapezoids, triangles, and elegant spirals that coil in on themselves like fossilized snail shells. They are so immense, so perfect, that they don't feel like the work of human hands. And then you see the figures. There, etched into the desert plain, is a hummingbird, its long beak poised over an unseen flower, its wings a blur of motion frozen for 2,000 years. You drift sideways and find a monkey, its prehensile tail curled into an elaborate spiral. Over there is a spider rendered with the anatomical precision of a biology textbook. There are hundreds of these geoglyphs, ranging from these famous animal figures, the condor, the lizard, the whale, to more stylized humanoids, one of which has been nicknamed the astronaut for its vaguely helmeted appearance. They are drawings on a scale so vast they can only be truly appreciated in their entirety from the sky. The incredible thing is how they were made. It wasn't some lost, high-tech process. It was stunningly simple. The desert floor is covered in a layer of reddish-brown, iron oxide-coated pebbles. The Nazca people created these images by simply removing this dark top layer, exposing the lighter-colored earth beneath. It's a process of subtraction, like a giant celestial sketch pad where the artist uses an eraser instead of a pencil. The region's bone-dry, windless climate has preserved these delicate drawings for centuries, protecting them from the erosion that would have wiped them out anywhere else. It was the world's largest art installation, created with nothing more than careful planning and a lot of hard work. You can't help but smile at the thought of the project manager trying to explain to his team that their job for the next month is to clear away pebbles to make a monkey that no one on the ground will ever actually be able to see properly. But that, of course, is the great central mystery. Why? Who is the intended audience for art that is best viewed from a God's eye perspective? Archaeologists still puzzle over their exact purpose. Were they a massive astronomical calendar with lines tracking the movement of the sun, moon, and stars to predict solstices and planting seasons? Perhaps. Were they ceremonial pathways, routes for ritual processions where people would physically walk the outline of a sacred animal to connect with its spirit? This is a leading theory suggesting the experience wasn't visual, but physical. Or did they relate to a desperate search for water, with the figures acting as giant prayers to the gods who controlled the precious resource in this parched land? Of course, whenever you have a mystery this big and this visual, someone is going to suggest it was aliens. The fringe theory, popularized in the 1960s, is that the lines were runways for extraterrestrial visitors. It's a fun cinematic idea, but one that has no real evidence to support it, and more importantly, it robs the Nazca people of their incredible ingenuity and vision. The answer, as always, is probably more complex and more human. The same figures that appear on the desert floor are found on their intricate pottery and beautiful textiles. These weren't random doodles. They were powerful symbols at the heart of their culture. You float silently above this silent, sprawling message, written not with ink, but with the earth itself. It is a testament to a people's profound connection to their landscape and their sky, a prayer etched into the desert, waiting for an answer that still whispers on the wind. The silent, sprawling canvas of the Nazca Desert fades, but the dry, coastal air remains. You've moved a few hundred miles north along the Peruvian coast, into a series of fertile river valleys that cut through the desert like green ribbons. The time frame is roughly the same, from about 200 to 850 CE. In these oases of life, another culture flourished, one that built not with subtle lines on the ground, but with monumental assertions of power that reached for the sky. You are in the land of the Moshe. You stand at the foot of a colossal structure that dominates the valley. It looks like a huge, weathered hill, a sun-baked mountain of adobe bricks. This is a Waka, one of the great Moche pyramids. The two most famous, the Waka del Sol and Waka del Ulu, are estimated to have been built with more than 140 million mud bricks. From the outside, they look drab and monolithic, but deep within their chambers and in the tombs of the elites they buried, the Moshe world comes to life in terrifying, brilliant color. The Moshe left behind no writing system, at least not one we can decipher. Instead, they left us their pottery. And what a collection it is. They were absolute masters of the ceramic arts, and their stirrup-spout vessels are like three-dimensional storybooks. Some are incredibly realistic portrait heads, depicting individuals with such specific detail wrinkles, scars, unique expressions that you feel you could pick them out of a crowd. They aren't generic faces, they are people. But other pots depict their entire world in miniature. You see fishermen and reed boats, women weaving textiles, and healers tending to the sick. And you see their myths and rituals, a dark and complex cosmology of gods, demons, and warrior priests. Honestly, they left behind the most detailed and occasionally startlingly explicit pottery collection in human history. You look closely at a fine line painting on one of these vessels. The scene is one of ritual combat. Two lavishly dressed warriors are fighting. One gains the upper hand, and the loser is stripped of his armor and weapons. His throat is cut. A priestess collects the blood in a ceremonial goblet, which is then presented to a supreme figure, a warrior priest with the fangs of a jaguar and the wings of a bird. For a long time, scholars looked at these scenes and assumed they were pure mythology, a dramatic story like the Greek myths. It was a good story, but surely not something that happened in real life. It certainly makes you rethink your complaints about having to attend a boring work function. Then, in 1987, everything changed. A team of Peruvian archaeologists led by Walter Alva got a tip about looters plundering a rich tomb at a site called Huaca Rajada, near the town of Saipan. They rushed to the site and, after chasing off the looters, began a proper excavation. What they found was one of the most spectacular archaeological discoveries of the 20th century. The untouched tomb of a Moche ruler, the Lord of Saipan. As they carefully worked their way down, they uncovered the remains of a man in his late 30s, buried with an almost unbelievable quantity of treasure. He was covered in gold, silver, and turquoise. He wore a golden headdress, golden face masks, and intricate ear spools depicting warriors. He was buried with a golden scepter and surrounded by the sacrificed remains of his guards and several young women. But the most astonishing thing was this. The dead lord was dressed in the exact regalia of the main figure from the pottery paintings, the fanged warrior priest receiving the goblet of blood. He was the real thing. The myths on the pots were not myths at all. They were documentaries. The Moche were acting out these terrifying ceremonies in real life. This discovery was like finding the user's manual for their entire society after centuries of just staring at the pictures. Historians still argue whether the Moche were a unified empire or a collection of independent city-states who shared a common culture and religion. But the tombs of Saipan proved that this shared culture was built on a foundation of ritualized violence and human sacrifice. The Moche were also master metallurgists. They developed a quirky technique called depletion gilding, where they would use a chemical process to dissolve the copper from the surface of a copper-gold alloy, leaving behind a thin, deceptively brilliant layer of pure gold. It was an ingenious way to make their treasures look far more valuable than they were, a bit of ancient bling-related smoke and mirrors. But their ingenuity couldn't save them. Around 600 CE, the region was hit by a mega El Niño event, a generation-long catastrophe of extreme weather. First came decades of torrential rain and flooding that would have washed away their adobe pyramids and destroyed their irrigation systems. This was followed by an equally devastating period of intense drought. For a society whose rulers based their power on their ability to mediate with the gods and ensure the world's stability, this climatic chaos would have been a fatal blow. The gods were clearly no longer listening, and the Moche world, for all its golden splendor, simply fell apart. The fertile, blood-soaked valleys of the Moche coast dissolve behind you, and you are cast out onto the largest, emptiest expanse on the planet, the Pacific Ocean. You drift for what feels like an eternity, a tiny speck on an endless sheet of deep royal blue. There is no land in sight, no other ships, no sign of human life. The sky overhead is vast and clear, and at night, the stars are so bright they seem to be within arm's reach. This is a journey into profound isolation. When you finally find land, it is the most remote inhabited place on Earth. You are on Rapa Nui, a tiny triangular speck of volcanic rock more than 2,000 kilometers from its nearest populated neighbor. The year is around 1400 CE. You scramble ashore, and the first thing that strikes you is the emptiness. The island is a landscape of rolling, grassy hills, shaped by the 3 extinct volcanoes that form its corners, but there are no trees, not a single one. It is a windswept, stark, and hauntingly beautiful place. The only sound is the relentless wind and the crash of the Pacific against the black volcanic cliffs. It feels like the last piece of land at the end of the world, and then you see them, standing on stone platforms, or ahu, along the coastline. Their backs to the violent sea are the silent watchers. The Moai. You walk towards the nearest group. They are colossal, monolithic human figures, carved from the yellowish-gray volcanic tuff. They are not just heads. They have torsos, stylized arms held stiffly at their sides, and long, elegant fingers resting on their abdomens. Their features are stark and powerful. A heavy brow, a prominent nose, a thin, determined line for a mouth, and deep, empty eye sockets that were once inlaid with white coral and red scoria to give them a startlingly lifelike gaze. They are giants, some standing over 30 feet tall and weighing more than 80 tons. They stare inland across the island with an air of immense patience and otherworldly authority. They look like they are perpetually unimpressed with whatever you're doing. You make your way to the place where they were born, the quarry at Ranowaraku. The entire side of this volcanic crater is a moai factory, frozen in time. You see dozens upon dozens of statues in every stage of completion. Some are just faint outlines on the rock face. Others are nearly finished, still attached to the bedrock by a thin keel of stone running down their backs. The largest of them all, a monster known as El Gigante, lies here unfinished. He is nearly 70 feet long and would have weighed an estimated 270 tons. It's clear the ambition of the carvers eventually outstripped even their incredible skill. The ground is littered with the thousands of simple stone hand tools, called taki, that they used to chip away at the mountain. For years, the world knew these as the Easter Island heads, because many were buried up to their shoulders in sediment over the centuries. But a quirky and visually stunning discovery of modern excavations is that, yes, they all have bodies. They aren't just stoic faces. They are complete figures, their torsos often protected from erosion and covered in intricate carvings that the exposed heads have lost. It's a bit like discovering your garden gnome is actually a life-size statue buried underground. But how did a tiny, isolated population with no draft animals, no wheels, and no metal tools carve and move these giants across miles of difficult terrain? And more importantly, why did they stop? This brings you to the island's great cautionary tale. The traditional story is one of self-inflicted ecological disaster. The people of Rapa Nui, locked in a competitive frenzy of statue building between rival clans, cut down every last tree on the island. The trees were used for lumber, for fuel, and most critically, as rollers and levers to transport the moai. Without their forests, the soil eroded, the seabirds vanished, the canoes for deep-sea fishing could no longer be built, and their society collapsed into warfare and starvation. It's a powerful, tragic story of ecocide. However, historians still debate whether this clean, self-destruction narrative is the whole truth. More recent evidence suggests that the island's population was actually quite stable and sustainable for a long time. The real collapse, this newer theory argues, didn't happen until after the first Europeans arrived in the 18th century. It was the introduction of foreign diseases, and most brutally, the Peruvian slave raids of the 1860s that truly shattered their society and wiped out the elders who held the knowledge of their traditions, including how to read their unique, undeciphered script, Rongorongo. The truth may be a complex mix of both. A society that had already stressed its environment to the breaking point, only to be pushed over the edge by outside contact. You stand before a moai, its coral eyes long gone, and feel the weight of that mystery. It is a silent witness to a story of incredible achievement and catastrophic loss, a story that still whispers a warning on the lonely Pacific wind. The lonely, windswept grasslands of Rapa Nui dissolve into the vast blue of the ocean, and your journey carries you thousands of miles west. You cross the Pacific, the Indian Ocean, and finally make landfall on the great continent, Africa. You move inland, leaving the humid coast behind, climbing onto a high sun-drenched plateau. The air is dry and warm, and the landscape is a stunning panorama of rolling savanna and massive, rounded granite hills called kapes that look like sleeping giants. The year is around 1450 CE. In Europe, the printing press is a brand new invention, and the Renaissance is just beginning to blossom. Here, a great African kingdom has already risen, thrived, and is now beginning to fade. You follow a path that winds between the granite hills, and then you see it. It doesn't rise with the geometric aggression of a pyramid, but seems to grow out of the landscape itself. It is a city of stone. This is Great Zimbabwe, which translates to Great Stone Houses or Venerated Houses in the Shona language, and the name is an understatement. For centuries, when early European colonists first encountered these ruins, their colonial mindset simply refused to believe that native Africans could have built something so magnificent. They invented fantastical stories, attributing the city to the Queen of Sheba or ancient Phoenician sailors, anyone but the ancestors of the local people. It was a willful, racist blindness to the genius of the civilization that actually existed here. You approach the most impressive part of the city, the Great Enclosure. Its outer wall is a masterpiece of dry stone construction. There is no mortar holding the millions of carefully shaped granite blocks together, only gravity and immense skill. The wall is over 36 feet high in places and runs for more than 800 feet in a graceful, sweeping curve. It's the largest ancient structure south of Sahara. The sheer precision is breathtaking. The stones are laid in neat, level courses, and the top of the wall is decorated with a delicate chevron pattern. You find an opening and slip inside. The passageways are narrow, forcing you to walk in single file. The cool stone walls close on either side. This creates a sense of intimacy and control, a stark contrast to the massive scale of the outer wall. The passages suddenly open into a large circular area, and there, before you, is the city's most enigmatic feature, the conical tower. It's a solid, perfectly proportioned stone cone, 30 feet high and 18 feet in diameter at its base. It serves no obvious structural purpose. It's not a watchtower, and its interior is solid stone. Historians still argue about its precise function. Was it a symbolic granary, representing the king's control over the food supply and thus the wealth of the kingdom? Was it a phallic symbol, a monument to the virility and fertility of the royal line? We simply don't know. It stands in beautiful, silent mystery. You leave the great enclosure and climb the steep path up the nearby hill to the oldest part of the city, the hill complex. This was the royal palace, the seat of the king and the center of religious authority. You stand on the summit amidst a maze of stone walls that incorporate the natural giant boulders of the hilltop into their design. From here, the king could look down on his entire capital, the great enclosure below, and the sprawling city of mud and thatch huts that would house up to 20,000 people. This was the center of a vast trading empire. Its power was built on two things: cattle, which represented wealth and status, and gold. The rulers of Great Zimbabwe controlled the gold mines of the interior. They traded this precious metal, along with ivory, with the Swahili merchants on the coast. In return, they received exotic goods from across the world. Archaeologists digging here have found Chinese porcelain, Persian glassware, and Arabian beads, evidence of a thriving connection to the great Indian Ocean trade network. But now, the city is silent. Sometime in the mid-15th century, it was abandoned. There was no great battle, no fire, no single catastrophic event. The people just left. The reasons are still debated, but it seems Great Zimbabwe became a victim of its own success. Supporting such a large population would have put immense strain on the local environment. The hillsides would have been stripped of trees for firewood, and the vast cattle herds would have led to overgrazing and soil erosion. The gold mines may have started to run dry. A slight shift in the climate toward drier conditions could have been the final straw. The kingdom didn't vanish, but its center of power shifted, moving to new capitals. You stand on the hill complex as the African sun begins to set, casting long shadows from the silent stones. The city feels less like a ruin and more like a magnificent shell, left behind when its inhabitants moved on, a quiet monument to a powerful kingdom that simply outgrew its home. The golden light on the stones of Great Zimbabwe softens and cools as the savanna gives way to a much more dramatic landscape. You've moved northeast, climbing thousands of feet into the rugged, mountainous terrain of the Horn of Africa. You are in the Ethiopian highlands, a place of high plateaus, deep canyons, and thin, crisp air that feels electric with history. The year is around 350 CE in Europe. The Roman Empire is beginning to creak under its own weight, but here, another empire is at the absolute peak of its power and confidence. You're approaching the capital city, Axum. It's a bustling, cosmopolitan hub, and the air smells of roasting coffee beans, exotic spices, and the sharp, sacred scent of frankincense. But rising above the markets and palaces are objects that defy belief. They are the stelae, giant, single-piece obelisks carved from solid granite, pointing to the sky like colossal stone fingers. They are not rough-hewn monuments. They are architectural marvels. The largest ones are carved to look like multi-story buildings, complete with fake doors at the base and perfectly etched windows all the way up their sides. They are skyscrapers of the ancient world, advertisements of wealth and power that you can see from miles away. You stand at the base of what was once the greatest of them all, a stele that now lies in a heap of colossal fragments. This is the Great Stele. When it stood, it was over 100 feet tall and weighed an estimated 520 tons, making it one of the largest single pieces of stone ever quarried and erected by humans. It's a jaw-dropping feat of engineering. The fact that it broke while they were trying to put it up is a sober reminder that even for the greatest civilizations, some projects are just a bit too ambitious. You can almost hear the ancient foreman muttering, "Well, so much for that idea. Lunch, everyone?" These stelae were not just for show. They were tombstones, markers for the underground burial chambers of Axum's kings and nobles. They were statements of power, and that power was built on one thing: location. Axum controlled the vital trade routes of the Red Sea, from its main port of Agilis on the coast. Axumite ships dominated the maritime crossroads, linking the Roman Mediterranean with the riches of India and beyond. Gold, ivory, rhinoceros horn, and exotic animals flowed out of Africa, while Roman wine, olive oil, and textiles flowed in. Axum was the gatekeeper of global trade, and it grew incredibly wealthy. They even minted their own coins in gold, silver, and bronze, a practice unheard of in most of sub-Saharan Africa at the time. You see one of these coins, and it tells the story of a profound cultural shift. The early coins show a crescent and disc, symbols of older polytheistic gods. But then, under the reign of the great King Ezana in the mid-4th century, the symbol changes. It becomes a cross. Ezana converted to Christianity, and Axum became one of the very first Christian kingdoms in the world, adopting the new faith even before some parts of the Roman Empire had fully committed. This was a savvy political move as much as a spiritual one, aligning the kingdom with the rising power of Christian Rome and cementing its place in that international network. You wander toward a compound that feels different from the rest. It is the Church of Our Lady Mary of Zion, and here you encounter Axum's most enduring and famous claim, a belief that is absolutely central to its identity. According to the Ethiopian Orthodox tradition, this church is the final resting place of the most sacred object in the Judeo-Christian world, the Ark of the Covenant. The story holds that it was brought here by Menelik I, the son of King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba. A single monk is chosen to guard the sacred relic for his entire life, and no one else is ever allowed to see it. While there is no historical proof, it is a matter of unshakable national and religious faith. But this golden age did not last. Starting in the 7th century, Axum began a long, slow decline. Historians still debate the primary cause. Was it the rise of Islam and the expansion of the Arab caliphates, which seized control of the Red Sea and cut off Axum's main artery of trade? Or was it an environmental catastrophe, where centuries of intensive farming led to massive soil erosion and a changing climate crippled their agricultural base? The kingdom didn't vanish, but it turned its back on the sea, its capital moving further into the defensive highlands. The once mighty coastal empire became an isolated, medieval Christian kingdom. You look again at the fallen Great Stele, a monument to an ambition that finally overreached, and it feels like a perfect metaphor for the kingdom itself, a power that once touched the sky, now broken but never forgotten. The thin, cool air of the Ethiopian highlands grows thick and heavy. You drift across the Atlantic, the centuries peeling away like layers of old paint, and you find yourself in the heart of another continent. You're standing in a vast, flat river valley, a floodplain so wide the opposite bluffs are just a hazy line on the horizon. The air is humid, smelling of damp earth, river mud, and the wood smoke from 1,000 cooking fires. The year is 1100 CE. You are in North America, in the land that will one day be Illinois, just across the river from a future city called St. Louis. And you are at the edge of a metropolis that rivals London or Paris in population. This is Cahokia. There are no great stone walls or carved obelisks here. This is a city built of the earth itself. Before you rises the city's heart, a man-made mountain of soil, clay, and sand, hauled basket by basket over decades. This is Monk's Mound, the largest prehistoric earthwork in the Americas. You begin to climb the long wooden staircase that leads to its summit. It's a serious climb, rising in 4 great terraces to a height of 100 feet. Its base is larger than that of the Great Pyramid of Giza. By the time you reach the top, you're breathing heavily and thinking that the ancient rulers probably had a much more dignified way of getting up here, or at least a better catering service. From the flattened summit, the entire city spreads out below you. It is a breathtaking sight. A sprawling capital of up to 20,000 people. You see a vast 50-acre central plaza perfectly leveled where markets, religious festivals, and games would have taken place. All around it are more than 100 other earthen mounds of various sizes, some topped with the homes of the elite, others used for the burials of important figures. Thousands of simple, thatch-roofed houses stretch out in every direction. The central sacred part of the city is enclosed by a 2-mile-long defensive stockade made of 20,000 massive logs. This was a place of immense power and organization. Your eyes are drawn to a series of large circles made of wooden posts off to the west of the city. These were Cahokia's calendars, dubbed Woodhenge by archaeologists. By watching where the sun rose in relation to these carefully placed red cedar posts, the city's priests could accurately mark the solstices and equinoxes, setting the schedule for planting, harvesting, and religious ceremonies. It was their celestial clock, their way of keeping their world in sync with the cosmos. It's also where they likely enjoyed a special highly caffeinated beverage called the black drink, a kind of ancient energy drink brewed from yaupon holly, the residue of which has been found in special beakers here, far from where the holly naturally grows. But who ran this magnificent city? Historians still argue whether Cahokia was a true state, with a single god-king ruling from a great temple on top of the very mound you're standing on, or a massively overgrown chiefdom, a coalition of clans held together by tribute and shared belief. Unlike the Maya, the Cahokians left no writing behind, so we are left to read their story in the earth, and sometimes that story is incredibly grim. Just south of Monk's Mound is a smaller, unassuming ridge known as Mound 72. Excavations there revealed the burial of a single important man, laid on a cape of 20,000 meticulously crafted shell beads arranged in the shape of a falcon, but he wasn't alone. He was buried with the remains of over 250 other people. Most were human sacrifices, including 4 men who had been beheaded and had their hands removed, and a pit containing the bodies of more than 50 young women. It's a chilling testament to the rigid social hierarchy and the absolute power the rulers of Cahokia held over life and death. By 1350 CE, this great city was empty. Its plazas were silent, its mounds untended. Like so many of the places we visited, its decline was a complex mystery. Did they strip the surrounding forests for fuel and construction, leading to massive erosion and flooding that destroyed their maize fields? Did the concentration of so many people lead to diseases? Was there internal rebellion against the brutal, sacrificial power of the elite? Or did a shift in the climate, the beginning of the Little Ice Age, make their way of life in this specific spot unsustainable? The answer is likely all of the above. You stand on the empty summit, the wind whispering through the prairie grass, and you feel the immense, silent power of North America's own lost city, the final stop on our long journey into the past. And so, your long journey through the quiet halls of forgotten worlds comes to a gentle close. You've stood on the cold hills of Anatolia before the dawn of history, and you felt the humid air of a great city of mounds in the heart of a continent. You have walked the ghostly, perfect grid of a city with no name, and you have stood in the shadow of silence, watching giants on the most remote island on Earth. Each of these places was, for a time, the entire world to its people. Their triumphs and their fears, their art and their beliefs, were etched into stone and earth with a profound sense of permanence. Yet, they all faded. The palaces crumbled, the languages were forgotten, and the jungle and the desert and the simple, patient grass moved in to reclaim what was theirs. But their echoes remain, whispering to us across the silent centuries, reminding us that even the greatest and most powerful civilizations are just fleeting moments, brief, brilliant flashes in the immense, quiet darkness of time. Let the last of these images dissolve now, like sugar in warm water. Feel the solid ground of Cahokia's great mound soften and fade away, leaving you floating peacefully in the warm, comfortable darkness of your own room. The stories are over. The journey is done. All that is left is to let their whispers guide you into a deep and untroubled sleep. The mysteries we have touched upon tonight can wait for another day. For now, there is only the gentle rhythm of your own breathing, the soft weight of your blanket, and the quiet promise of dreams.